In the winter of 1949, deep within the frozen granite of the Black Hills of South Dakota, the United States Army Corps of Engineers began drilling into the dark to understand why a massive military convoy quietly cut through the snow-laden pines of this sacred mountain range. We have to look closely at the geopolitical panic consuming Washington at the dawn of the atomic age. The year 1949 was a pivot point in human history. The Soviet Union had just detonated its first nuclear weapon, shattering the American monopoly on atomic power. Suddenly, the military leadership realized that the surface of the Earth was no longer safe. The Pentagon needed a solution, and they needed it immediately. They required a network of deep, hardened underground command centers capable of surviving a multi-megaton nuclear blast. To achieve this, military geologists sought out the oldest, most stable geological formations on the North American continent. They needed thick, ancient, impenetrable bedrock that had remained undisturbed for billions of years. Their search led them directly to the Black Hills. Our team spent months tracking down the declassified logistical manifests from this era, and the sheer scale of the operation is staggering. Under the cover of a classified defense infrastructure initiative, heavy industrial machinery, diamond-tipped rotary drills, and specialized excavation crews were moved into a secluded sector of the mountains. The project was heavily compartmentalized. The young engineers operating the machinery were told they were simply testing structural integrity for deep-tier missile silos and subterranean bunker networks. For 6 months, the heavy, ground-shaking drills ground through the dense granite. The work was brutal, loud, and painfully slow, with the massive drill bits advancing mere inches during a 24-hour shift. The project logs describe a routine of mind-numbing monotony, where the only objective was to push deeper into the planet's crust. But on December 14, 1949, at precisely 420 feet below the surface, the monotony ended, and the course of alternative history was altered forever. At that exact depth, the heavy hydraulic gauges on the primary drilling rig began to vibrate wildly. The needle on the pressure indicator swung from maximum resistance to absolute zero in a fraction of a second. The lead mechanic assumed they had sheared the diamond teeth off the rotary head, or perhaps struck an underground aquifer that had washed away the stone. But there was no water. Instead, with a sudden, violent shudder that rattled the steel framework of the surface rig, the entire 3-ton drilling assembly dropped. It did not grind downward, it fell. It plummeted 16 feet through the rock in a single heartbeat, before the safety brakes caught the steel cables with a deafening screech. The engineers had bypassed the bedrock completely. They had broken through the natural crust of the Earth and dropped directly into a pressurized void. A vast, completely hollow subterranean chamber lay beneath the ancient granite. Almost immediately, the air trapped inside that dark space began escaping through the freshly drilled borehole. It rushed up the shaft, whistling with a high-pitched, metallic intensity that sounded like a dying machine. But as the drilling crew gathered around the opening, an unsettling realization swept through the underground camp. The pressure escaping the Earth was not the chaotic, random venting of natural pocket gas. It was moving in a distinct, rhythmic pattern. It was a low, repeating, geometric hiss that rose and fell with mathematical precision. To the men standing on that wooden platform, it felt less like escaping air and more like the synchronized breathing of a sleeping giant deep within the mountain. When our team began investigating this anomaly, we encountered an immediate wall of official denial. If you look at the public archives of the Black Hills engineering projects, this specific drilling sector, known in the early logs as Sector 7, Alpha, is dismissed as a historical footnote. The official documentation claims the shaft was abandoned due to unexpected structural instability. A routine pocket cave, in that compromised the safety of the workers. But we knew that explanation did not match the timeline of military movements that followed. We spent weeks combing through early unclassified logistical logs, transport receipts, and fragmented correspondence files from the Department of Defense. What we uncovered paints a terrifyingly different picture of what actually occurred in the winter of 1949. We managed to track down the private field journals of lead engineer Captain Marcus Vance, a highly decorated military surveyor who was overseeing the drilling operations at Sector 7, Alpha. His personal writings reveal a level of scientific bewilderment that never made it into the official Pentagon reports. Vance wrote that according to every established law of geology, the void beneath the Black Hills should not have existed. The granite cap they had spent half a year drilling through was part of a stable craton, a solid mass of stone that had survived tectonic shifts for eons. For a completely hollow space to exist 400 feet beneath that weight without collapsing was a mechanical impossibility. Yet, the space was there. Vance's journals describe how, on December 16th, under a state of total military lockdown, a specialized reconnaissance team arrived at the site. They were not geologists. They were acoustic engineers and communications experts brought in from early defense research laboratories. They immediately set up high-frequency seismic sensors, directional microphones, and electromagnetic audio recorders around the mouth of the borehole. They lowered the equipment down into the 16-foot void, hoping to map the contours of what they assumed was a large, water-carved cavern. The data that came back shattered their expectations. When seismic waves are bounced through a natural cave, the return signal is chaotic, distorted, and irregular, reflecting the rough, uneven surfaces of eroded stone. But the needles on the military oscilloscopes did not record chaos. They returned lines that were perfectly straight, sharp, and geometric. The sound waves were bouncing off surfaces that were completely flat. The acoustic feedback mapped out flawless 90-degree angles, parallel corridors, sweeping, arched ceilings. The acoustics were not echoing off the random handiwork of nature. They were bouncing off highly sophisticated architecture. Captain Vance's log from that evening contains a single, underlined sentence that survived the military censors. The acoustic feedback indicates we have not found a cave. We have breached the roof of a massive, pre-existing subterranean network. By midnight on December 18th, the military command decided that acoustic mapping was no longer enough. They needed eyes inside the void. A specialized two-man reconnaissance team, consisting of a veteran combat engineer and a military photographer, was selected for the descent. They were loaded into a heavy, iron cable cage suspended by steel lines over the mouth of the borehole. Their equipment was extensive, powerful tactical searchlights, oxygen rebreathers, specialized chemical testing kits, and handheld 16mm movie cameras. As the winch began to turn, groaning under the weight of the iron cage, the two men disappeared down into the narrow 420-foot shaft, leaving the natural world behind. As the cage dropped past the lower boundary of the natural granite, the men found themselves suspended in an abyss so vast that the narrow beams of their tactical searchlights could not locate the opposing walls. They were hanging in a subterranean ocean of absolute darkness. But when they swept their lights downward, looking for the rough, boulder-strewn floor of an underground cavern, they saw something that stopped their breath. They did not see broken rock. They saw an immense, sprawling system of tunnels cutting through the deep earth. The construction of these tunnels defied comprehension. It was not concrete, and it was not the rough, hewn stone of ancient human miners. The walls of this subterranean system were lined with a completely smooth, dark, metallic, crystalline compound. Under the intense glare of the searchlights, the material cast a strange, iridescent sheen, shifting between shades of deep purple, silver, and matte black. It was entirely non-porous, bearing no seams, no joints, no tool marks, and zero signs of traditional excavation or masonry. To the trained eyes of the combat engineer, it appeared as though these tunnels had not been dug, but rather melted directly through the planet's mantle. It looked as if a high-energy thermal source had cut through the solid rock like a hot knife through wax, leaving behind a perfectly vitreous, glassy lining that left the surrounding granite completely undisturbed. As the iron cage touched the floor of the tunnel, the photographer stepped out onto the smooth, crystalline surface. According to the communication logs we recovered, he reached out his gloved hand and pressed it directly against the iridescent wall of the corridor. The moment his fingers made contact with the material, the radio transmission back to the surface camp cut out into a wall of high-pitched electronic static. The surface crew scrambled to adjust the frequencies, fearing a catastrophic equipment failure. But just before the signal died completely, the audio recorders captured the scout's voice, whispering through the static. "It's vibrating. The wall is warm." Our research team pushed further into the unclassified logistical manifests from the weeks following the initial entry, and we discovered that the Pentagon did not treat this as a localized anomaly. They realized they had stumbled upon something of global strategic significance. Within 48 hours of the cage descent, the simple drilling camp at Sector 7, Alpha was transformed into a highly restricted, heavily guarded military laboratory. They brought in specialized equipment from the early Atomic Energy Commission and advanced electromagnetic resonance devices that had been developed during wartime radar projects. They began running deep, tier seismic and electromagnetic scans through the entire geography of the Black Hills. What they mapped changed the nature of the project from a structural survey into a historical investigation. The tunnels beneath the mountains were not isolated chambers. The scans revealed that they were part of a sprawling, continent-spanning grid that stretched far beyond the borders of South Dakota. The architecture of the network was not random. It followed a highly complex, intelligent design. When the military cartographers mapped out the paths of the tunnels, they realized the layout mirrored the exact geometry of a modern electrical circuit board, but scaled to a staggering, gargantuan size. There were massive, circular junction chambers hundreds of feet wide, which acted as nodes connecting long, perfectly straight conduits. These conduits plunged deep into the lower crust of the earth, far below the reach of any modern human mining technology or engineering capability. Even more disturbing to the military scientists were the ongoing acoustic signatures. The low, repeating hiss that the drilling crew had heard on day one was not the venting of gas. The entire crystalline structure of the tunnel system was acting as a massive, planet-scale acoustic resonator. The smooth, metallic, crystalline walls were designed to capture the natural, low-frequency seismic vibrations of the Earth, the subtle kinetic movements of the continental plates, and channel them into a central point. The architecture was actively converting the chaotic energy of the planet into a perfect, repeating mathematical frequency. It was generating a fractal wave, a harmonic vibration that resonated at a constant, unvarying cycle. Our team began to cross-reference these precise scientific findings with the ancient oral traditions of the indigenous peoples of the region, the Lakota Sioux. For centuries, long before modern surveyors arrived with drills and dynamite, the tribal elders had held the Black Hills as a place of immense, sacred power. They did not just view the mountains as a beautiful landscape. They called them the Pahasapa, the heart of everything that is. The ancient winter counts and oral histories of the Lakota warned that the hills were a living entity, and that deep beneath the stone lay the Inyan, the primordial rock beings that had existed and breathed long before the creation of mankind. The traditional stories spoke of a great power sleeping within the earth, a power that regulated the balance of the natural world. In the winter of 1949, the United States military had not simply found a cave, they had driven a cold steel drill bit directly into that ancient, vibrating heart. Then, just as the scientific teams were beginning to understand the mathematical language of the subterranean grid, the Iron Curtain of total national security fell over Sector 7 Alpha. The transition was abrupt, violent, and complete. On December 29, 1949, a direct, high-priority order was issued from the highest levels of the Department of Defense, bypassing the local chain of command. The entire drilling sector was placed under immediate, absolute classification. The project was stripped from the Army Corps of Engineers and handed over to a highly secretive defense security detachment. The personnel who had witnessed the discovery were systematically separated and scattered. The reconnaissance scouts, the drilling mechanics, and the local guards were abruptly reassigned to isolated military outposts across the Pacific Theater, cut off from communication with one another. The original audio recordings of the geometric hiss, the seismic charts displaying the 90-degree corridors, and the miles of 16mm of movie film captured by the scouts inside the iridescent tunnels were collected by armed officers. The files were loaded into unnumbered, lead-lined security crates and flown via military transport to an undisclosed underground storage facility in New Mexico, vanishing from the public record entirely. But the military command did not stop at seizing the data. They wanted to ensure that no future geological survey, no independent mining company, and no curious civilian could ever stumble upon the breach at Sector 7 Alpha again. The Army Corps of Engineers was ordered to execute a massive, permanent structural erasure. They brought in a continuous convoy of heavy industrial cement mixers, routing them through the mountain passes under the dead of night. For 3 consecutive weeks, without a single hour of interruption, the military poured over 4,000 tons of industrial-grade, high-density concrete directly down into the 420-foot borehole. They did not just place a concrete cap over the opening. They backfilled the entire length of the shaft, turning the path into a solid, impenetrable pillar of stone, sealing the roof of the ancient crystalline network from the surface world. Following the sealing of the shaft, the official history of the region was systematically edited. The geological maps of South Dakota were quietly updated by federal authorities. The precise coordinates of the Vance survey were shifted by several miles or erased from the grid entirely, replaced with standard topographical markings indicating solid, unbroken granite. The entire mountainside surrounding the old drilling site was designated a restricted federal zone, closed off under the guise of forest conservation and wildlife protection. High chain link fences were erected deep within the pine forests, marked with weathered, ominous warning signs forbidding civilian entry. To this very day, independent hikers and local researchers who attempt to approach the historical coordinates of Sector 7 Alpha are routinely met by unmarked security vehicles and turned back by armed federal patrols who offer no explanation for their presence. Why did the establishment deploy such extreme measures to hide a subterranean discovery? Why exhaust millions of dollars and thousands of tons of concrete to seal a prehistoric tunnel system? The answer becomes clear when you look at the discovery through the broader framework of our forgotten past. If the public were to realize that deep beneath the oldest mountain ranges in North America lies a highly advanced, geometric, crystalline infrastructure, the entire mainstream narrative of human history would dissolve in a single afternoon. The academic institutions tell us that human civilization is a recent, linear phenomenon, that we evolved from primitive hunter-gatherers into industrial societies over a few thousand years, and that North America was an untouched, primitive wilderness before European colonization. The discovery of 1949 proves that narrative is a carefully maintained illusion. It provides undeniable physical evidence that long before modern history began, an advanced, pre-cataclysm civilization possessed the technology to manipulate the deep crust of the Earth. They understood the energetic frequencies of the planet, and they built a global, continent-spanning grid to harvest, convert, and utilize that power. It proves that we are not the pinnacle of evolutionary progress on this planet. We are merely a surface-dwelling society living on top of the ruined, sealed foundations of a forgotten world. A world that was engineered for a purpose we are no longer allowed to understand. But the concrete poured by the military in the winter of 1949 could only seal the entry point. It could not stop the mechanism of the grid itself. Over 70 years have passed since the Army Corps of Engineers tried to bury Sector 7 Alpha. But the ancient system beneath the stone remains active. In recent years, as civilian satellite technology, deep tier ground, penetrating radar, and independent seismic monitoring networks have become highly sophisticated, the signatures of the Black Hills anomaly are beginning to bleed back into the public sphere. Independent researchers and geophysicists have begun documenting strange, anomalous energy pulses radiating from deep within the South Dakota bedrock. These are not random seismic tremors. They are highly structured, low-frequency electromagnetic waves that conform to the exact mathematical fractal frequencies recorded in Captain Vance's hidden journals. Our team has been consistently monitoring these unclassified global data feeds, and the latest readings indicate that the Subterranean network is undergoing a significant shift. The subtle seismic patterns of the region are no longer chaotic. They are beginning to align, synchronizing with the geometric layout of the circuit board conduits mapped over 7 decades ago. The harmonic vibrations are increasing in intensity, rising through the granite and vibrating through the deep roots of the pine forests. The military tried to bury the truth under 4,000 tons of concrete, believing they could silence the past forever. But true history has a way of outlasting the empires that try to suppress it. The mountains have held their breath for generations, keeping the secret locked within the dark. But the concrete is cracking, the frequencies are rising, and the ground will eventually speak. We put countless hours of hard work, investigative research, and archival digging into bringing this hidden history to light. If you want to stand with us in uncovering the truth about our pre-cataclysm past, take a moment to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Our team reads every single thought you leave behind. Drop a comment below. Do you believe the military truly sealed the tunnels? Or are they still down there, utilizing this ancient infrastructure in secret? Thank you for watching Past Diaries. Stay vigilant and watch the horizon.